our story together. A Kenyan nurse in Boston, Massachusetts, has pleaded guilty in a $100 million home health care fraud and kickback scheme. Huu ni wakati wa maarifa na taarifa na kasisi. I am sure most of us, both in the USA and in Kenya, have heard the story of Faith Newton and Winnie Waruru, who were first apprehended on 31st of January 2021 and made first appearance in federal court in Boston on 1st February 2021 in connection with a home health care fraud scheme. On Tuesday, September 2022, the Department of Justice, through the U.S. Attorney's Office of the District of Massachusetts, made public the indictment of Winnie Waruru, who pleaded guilty in $100 million home health care fraud and kickback scheme. The indictment states that Winnie Waruru, age 42, pleaded guilty in federal court in Boston, Massachusetts, in the connection with the fraud. According to the U.S. Federal Bureau of Investigation, Boston Department, healthcare fraud is a crime that happens when a person or group deceives a healthcare system to receive unlawful benefits or payments. It is not a victimless crime. An indictment, on the other hand, is a formal accusation of crime decided upon and issued by a grand jury. It signals the beginning of a criminal case. A criminal case begins when a prosecutor or a grand jury issues formal charges against a defendant by means of complaint, criminal complaint, or an indictment. For Winnie Waruru, the indictment indicates that she pleaded guilty on September 8, 2022, to one count of conspiracy to commit healthcare fraud, one count of healthcare fraud, aiding and abetting, one count of conspiracy to pay and receive kickbacks, 2 counts of making false statements, and 1 count of making a false statement in a healthcare matter. Waruru was arrested and charged along with co-defendant Faith Newton in February 2021. Faith Newton, has pleaded not guilty and is pending trial. According to the indictment, from January 2013 to January 2017, Newton was part owner and operator of Arbor Home Care Services, LLC. At the time, Waruru was a licensed practical nurse employed as a home health nurse at Arbor. Waruru and allegedly Newton engaged in a conspiracy to use Arbor to defraud Mass Health and Medicare of at least $100 million by committing healthcare fraud and paying kickbacks to induce referrals. Newton then allegedly laundered the ill-gotten gains. Specifically, it is alleged that Arbor, through Newton and others, including Waruru, failed to train staff, billed for home health care services that were never provided for or not medically necessary, and billed for home health services that were not authorized. Arbor, through Newton and others, developed employment relationships as a way to pay kickbacks for patient referrals, regardless of medical necessity requirements. They also allegedly entered sham employment relationships with patients' family members to provide home health care aid services that were not medically necessary and routinely billed for fictitious visits that did not occur. As alleged in the civil complaint, Newton, either directly or through ABBA, targeted particularly vulnerable patients who were low income or on disability or suffering from depression or addiction. Waruru and ABBA billed mass health for Waruru's skilled nursing visits, many of which she did not perform, which were medically unnecessary sometimes or were not approved by a physician or a medical doctor. Waruru was personally responsible for causing ABBA to bill mass health for over 1.2 million US dollars in skilled nursing visits, much of which was fraudulent. Waruru also passed cash payments allegedly from Newton to two ABBA patients to retain those patients. The charges of healthcare fraud, conspiracy to commit healthcare fraud, money laundering conspiracy, and money laundering each provide for a sentence of up to 10 years in prison, 3 years of supervised release, and a fine of up to 250,000 US dollars, or twice the amount of money involved in the laundering. The conspiracy to pay kickbacks and make false statements in healthcare matter each provide for a sentence of up to 5 years in prison, 3 years of supervised release, and a fine of up to 250,000 US dollars. Prosecuting the case are United States Attorney Rachel S. Rollins, Philip M. Coney, Special Agent in charge of U.S. Department of Health and Health Services, Office of Inspector General, Office of Investigations. Joreen D. Simpson, Special Agent in charge of Internal Revenue Services, Criminal Investigation in Boston. Joseph R. Bonavolonta, Special Agent in charge of the Federal Bureau of Investigation, Assistant U.S. Attorney Rachel Heman of Rollins Healthcare Fraud Unit, Attorney David G. Tobin of Rollins Major Crime Unit, and Carol Head, Chief of Rollins Assets Recovery Unit, are prosecuting the case. U.S. Senior District Court Judge George A. O'Toole, Jr., scheduled sentencing for January 12, 2023. This is according to the U.S. Attorney's Office, District of Massachusetts. The details contained in the court documents are allegations. The remaining defendant, that is Faith Newton, is presumed innocent unless and until proven guilty beyond a reasonable doubt in a court of law. This information can be found on the Justice Department at www.justice.gov US AO-MA. As stated earlier on, an indictment is a formal accusation of a crime decided upon and issued by a grand jury. It signals the beginning of a criminal case. A criminal case begins when a prosecutor or a grand jury issues formal charges against a defendant by means of a criminal complaint or an indictment. After the prosecutor studies the information from investigators and any other information gathered from talking with the individuals involved, the prosecutor decides whether to present the case to grand jury. When a person is indicted in the United States, they are given formal notice that it is believed that they committed a crime. The indictment contains the basic information that informs the person of the charges against them. For potential felony charges, a prosecutor will present the evidence to an impartial group of citizens called a grand jury. Witnesses may be called to testify. Evidence is shown to the grand jury, and an outline of the case is presented to the grand jury members. The grand jury listens to the prosecutor and witnesses and then votes in secret on whether they believe that enough evidence exists to charge the person with a crime. A grand jury may decide not to charge an individual based on the evidence. No indictment would come from the grand jury. All proceedings and statements made by a grand jury are sealed, meaning that only the people in the room have knowledge about who said what about whom. The grand jury is a constitutional requirement for certain types of crimes so that a group of citizens who do not know the defendant can make an unbiased decision about evidence before voting to charge an individual with a crime. Grand juries are made up of approximately 16 to 23 members. At least 12 jurors must concur in order to issue an indictment. States are not required to charge by use of a grand jury, even though many do so. After the defendant is charged, she can either hire an attorney or may choose to be represented by an attorney provided by the government. That is, a public defender at no or at a minimal charge. The defendant's attorney assists the defendant in understanding the law and the facts of the case and represent the defendant just as the prosecutor will represent the government. So for a case of consideration today, that is of Waruru and Faith Newton, is a case that involved fraud, integrity, ethics, morality, and justice. And my question is, what motivates people, particularly immigrants, to defraud even when the legal and prosecuting systems are well known to the defrauding agent or persons? How does the case in question affect Kenyans and Africans living in the United States of America? You know, there is the notion of hit and run mentality where individuals believe that they can be sneaky, scam the system, and run as soon as they hit the target. This is evident in the case of our discussion today. The illegal activities to defraud started in 2013, where the duo used Abba Home Healthcare Services, LLC, as a conduit to siphon $100 million from Mass and Medicare, a program that provides healthcare primarily for people with low incomes, by claiming refunds and filing false statements. By the end of 2017, people had made their killing, and then they closed down the company. You would think that that was the end of the game, right? The schemer were in the end the winners, no pun intended. Unfortunately, this is not how it works. The federal investigation agencies were never far off, working with patients of Ashita, crushing slowly but sure, gathered evidence enough to secure an indictment. Sure enough, on January 1st, 2021, 4 years later, the FBI pounced and arrests were made. America, of course, is like every human society. Corruption happens here too. But justice and legal systems work. As the legendary country music singer Kenny Rogers once put it, you cannot outrun the long arm of the law. No, you cannot outrun the long arm of the law. You can hide out for a while, but you cannot outrun the long arm of the law. Let us hope we can all learn our lessons from this case. Unfortunately, it is not working very well for our Kenyan siblings in Boston, Massachusetts. Ni hayo tu kwa maarifa na taarifa na kasisi. Asanteni.